I want to do one more thing about the priests from the Torah before we go, and then when we come back, we're going to start exploring who the different priests are. So we're going to look at the Aaronic priests, the Mushite priests, right, or the priests that come from Moses. There's a few other sects of priests. And we're also then going to leap ahead a little bit to talk about the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the Essenes. Because part of what we need to understand is who are the priests initially and who do they become. And the way that the temple impacts their evolution is quite present in the Torah, on the one hand, but also not present in the Torah, but something that comes after the Torah. Okay? So we're going to jump a little bit out of Friedman because I want to read, for example, with you some selections from the book of Josiah, right? Which on the one hand is a Deuteronomic retelling, but in particular it's a Deuteronomic retelling in the midst of a priestly system. Meaning the priests are still functioning, it's still before the destruction of the first temple, and they're still doing something, and actually part of what Josiah is reminding them is that they need to observe Passover. And Passover is all about sacrifices in particular. So we're gonna do that when we get back. We'll probably spend a couple weeks on that. And then I want to look at a few things in Numbers, and then we're going to finish in Deuteronomy, because Deuteronomy is really its own tale. We should be able to time it so that we're doing Deuteronomy when we're reading Deuteronomy. Okay? Right, which is around the end of July, beginning of August, and that will take us up to about Rosh Hashanah. Then we'll be able to finish the class and coincide. It will coincide with the end of the Jewish year. There's been some requests from people for the next class to do a class on what happens after you die, meaning Jewish understanding of the afterlife, resurrection, reincarnation, the Messiah, heaven, hell.
Just shoot me.
Just shoot you?
Probate. Probate. You mean purgatory?
It's syncretic.
We can do it can be a small class. It doesn't have to be for an entire year. But it can be like a mini semester, so to speak. Huh? Yeah, Sheol. But also, there's been questions about like, what does messianism look like? What does it look like for the end of days? What does it look like for a messianic figure to come? What does the kind of the different models of peace, kind of utopian peace versus just peace versus whatever? Some questions about what do Jews believe about resurrection? What do Jews believe about the afterlife? What do Jews believe about, etc.?
And the answer is whatever you want.
Yeah, on some level, yeah, that's exactly correct. With the exception of probate.
Maybe a class or just one class about that.
Maybe like a 2 or 3 part class.
Because I don't know.
That way we can all
would
plan
be
ahead.
enough.
I don't know that we would spend a year on it.
I know.
Because then we'll have to have the class, and then we'll have to do after the class. Jerry, when I was younger, I never knew that probate was a different thing. I kept on thinking that they were talking about prostate, and I just didn't.
You get older and you know the difference.
I bet you do. Are you recording right now?
Absolutely.
Then I won't say the next thing I was going to
We gotta stop this recording.
This is a PSA announcement.
That reminds me of when the famous atheist scientist Richard Dawkins was asked, "What will happen to you after you die?" He said, "I suppose I shall either be buried or cremated."
The end.
Yep. Does anyone read Mitch Albom books?
Yeah.
So Mitch Albom wrote a book called Have a Little Faith. And it's the book where he was asked by his rabbi in New Jersey growing up to come back and meet with him to basically tell him that he was dying. I forget if it was of cancer or whatever. And he wanted him to write his eulogy. And so this is Mitch Albom, of course, had been distanced from his rabbi for most of his life post-bar mitzvah. And they start talking and they would spend time together and get to know him and whatever. And he does all of these things. And there's this great scene at the end of the book. The book is not just about the eulogy. It's about lots of other things. But there's a great scene at the end of the book where everyone's gathered for the rabbi's funeral. Sorry, spoiler alert, he died. And after Albom is done delivering the eulogy, the scene is essentially that the rabbi's grandson comes up onto the bima, and he has a tape recorder, because I think in the day they still had tape recorders, and he pushes play, and on the tape recording is the rabbi speaking. He says, well, I guess if you're playing this, then thank you all for coming to my funeral. And he says something effective, and I can finally answer the question that you've all been asking me for my entire career of what happens after we die. And I now know the answer, but I'm not going to tell you. Right? You know, it's like something like that. So. Yeah.
Today is Lag
Today is Lag BaOmer. You are correct.
And
Thank God.
so Ann and I learned in Rabbi Darby's class that if you wanted to, you could shave, you could cut your hair today.
Yes. I did this part, but I haven't done this part yet.
The days takes more time.
Yeah. But you know why?
We're halfway through.
Do I know why?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you could also get married today.
Yes.
And as the woman in the class, our other class said, now you tell me.
Right. So does anyone know what the Omer, what is the Omer? What is an Omer?
The
amount of wheat.
Right. So an Omer
is a sheaf.
literally Omer means sheaf. Okay. When do we start counting?
Second day.
Second day.
So the second night.
Second night of Passover.
That's number one.
Okay, this is number 1.
Yeah.
And we count for how many days?
49.
49.
3 weeks.
Shavuot. 7 weeks.
What's on 50?
Shavuot.
Shavuot. What does Shavuot literally mean?
Weeks.
Weeks. So this is 7 weeks, 7 days. And we call this the counting of the Omer. And why is it the counting of the Omer? What are we doing?
Counting from the wheat harvest.
That's right.
Barley
So
harvest to wheat
Shavuot,
harvest.
so Passover is the barley harvest, and Shavuot is the wheat harvest. It's also the first fruits. And so they would count, prepare each week all of the sheaves that they had in order to be able to tithe them, and then bring an offering to the temple as part of a pilgrimage festival. And during the course of the 7 weeks, we have different holidays. So literally 1 week after after Passover, we have Yom HaShoah. 1 week later, we have Yom HaZikaron. And Atzmaut. A little bit later, we're going to have Yom Yerushalayim, which is? It is the reunification of Jerusalem as a result of the 6-day war. And in the middle, right here, we have Lag BaOmer. What is Lag?
Lamed Gimel.
That's right. Lamed equals 30.
35.
Gimel equals 3.
33.
So it's the 33rd day of the Omer. It was also said that from the 1st to the 33rd was a time of mourning in Jewish history. Does anyone know why?
All these sad things happened in that.
That's true, but those are all later.
Anniversary of the death of Rabbi Shimon Bar
Shimon Bar
Yochai.
Yochai, that's right. And also one of the things that took place during this time was the Bar Kokhba revolt. So really it's kind of the bookend, post the destruction of the temple in 70 through about 132 to 135 CE, which is when the Bar Kokhba revolt takes place. It was said during that time that the rabbis would hide in caves as a way of being able to practice their religion, because they were not allowed to do so. And then when the Romans would come by, they would go out of the caves and they would shoot bows and arrows as a way of trying to suggest that they were trying to assimilate. And eventually, after the Bar Kokhba revolt, which presumably fell on Lag BaOmer, they were able to come out and practice faithfully and be openly Jewish. In some ways, that's actually not so different from some things that people are experiencing right now in Europe. But that aside, and so Lag BaOmer becomes a celebratory day. Many people during the first 33 days, like a Shloshim period, the first 30 days after death, do not shave, they don't cut haircuts, they don't get married, they don't go to concerts, they don't do celebratory things, and then that all gets suspended today. And so people will shave, they'll get married. It's a popular Jewish wedding day. They do bonfires and barbecues, which is happening at the PJCC this afternoon for anyone who wants. And it was said that many rabbis will go visit the grave of Shimon Bar Yochai at Mount Meron in the north of Israel, and kind of worship him and his piety and things like that.
They had a problem in Israel with some of the fires today.
Yeah, they always have a problem with some of the fires, not just because of the dry, arid conditions, but Israelis use the bonfire as an opportunity to burn lots of things, like garbage, or things that they don't want in their house anymore.
I was in Israel when they were having that, celebrating the
Yeah.
death or doing whatever they do with it.
Yeah.
And it's a huge, massive turnout.
Exactly.
They're all camping out.
Yeah.
And they're just thousands of them.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, it's a massive, kind of, it's kind of like, there's certain Rabbis, huh?
Burning Man.
It kind of feels like that,
Thinking
yeah.
of that.
Yeah.
Burning Man.
So, anyway. So it's a happy day.
Another idea stolen from the Jews.
Yeah, what?
So according to this, Simon Bar Yochai is considered to be the first Kabbalist.
Later, yes. So in the 16th century, when the mystics, the Kabbalists in Sfat, create their whole kind of ideology and framework, Shimon Bar Yochai is revered by them as kind of the founder of it. Obviously, he's living 1,500 years
They
before
claim
that.
he authored the Zohar, which we know is at 12,
Yes, and so
1600.
that's why they go to his grave on Mount Meron
Right.
in order to be able to kind of celebrate him and the gift that he gave of the Zohar. So, which is the basic book of Lurianic Kabbalah.
So, I mean, and this, there was 1,000, they're all black hat.
Yep,
I mean,
it's a very...
And they're all camping out. It's just, and the usual is just a very unique gathering of people.
But in terms of the bonfires, if you look out on certain parts of the hillsides of Israel, you can literally see bonfires popping up all over the place. There's a cloud of smoke from this. Yes, the dry conditions are really bad, but I remember walking through the streets and seeing people like throwing their mattresses in the bonfires. So then all of the chemicals and things like that.
Trying to discourage some of those.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to look at a really complex story with you about the priests. And it comes with what we'll call the formal initiation of the role of the priests. Meaning, we've said that we're going to have the priests do their thing. They're the ones who respond against the golden calf. Aaron is the leader who is responsible for the building of the golden calf, but he also becomes the founder, if you will, of the priestly sect in the Torah. He is going to be among the people who guides the building of the Mishkan with Bezalel. And then finally, the beginning of Leviticus talks about all of the different kinds of sacrifices. We got the burnt offering and the well-being offering and the grain offering and the sin offering and all of these other offerings. But finally, after you get all that stuff out of the way, they actually have to figure out what does it mean to show up to work and do the job. Okay? So they're on the job, and they got to figure out how to actually be priests. This is only according to the Torah. We haven't talked about the historical connections just yet. And so turn to page 630 in the Red Chumashim. It's chapter 9. We just read it a couple weeks ago. If you want to follow along in Friedman, it is on page 202. Should be no surprise to you that the book of Leviticus is almost exclusively in P. What'd you say?
Pretty blue.
Pretty blue. Okay.
It's a pretty blue.
It is a pretty blue. You'll understand why we're going to read this in a second. And I want to read chapters 9 and chapters 10 with you. Chapter 9 and 10. Because one of the things that we learn about being a priest is that it's actually not such an easy job. It's pretty complicated. And not only is it complicated, this is the kind of spiritual piece of it, it's pretty political. That's going to be the second piece of it. So we're going to do the spiritual part first, which comes out of the Torah, and then we're going to do the political part when we come back, which is understanding that there probably were multiple kinds of priests that came from different lines of Levi, or maybe even from different lines of other tribes as well, and trying to figure out who these people were. There's actually a polemic in history between the Aaronic priests and the Moses priests. We always think about the priests as descending from from Aaron, but it may have actually been that Moses was his own group of priests, what we'll call the Mushite priests, or the mushy priests. But that's another story. Okay? That's what happened if they didn't cook their meat all the way through. It was mushy. Yes?
Well, if the priests were doing what they do in the temple, and that's where they did their work. There couldn't have been that many priests. I mean, how many priests do they need to do the work of the temple?
How many priests does it take to change a light bulb?
Right.
I mean,
None. I'll sit in the dark. And full check.
No, but I mean.
yeah, it's a great question. And it was clear that not all, like the Mishnah will go into significant detail about what multiple priests would do. It wasn't just the person who was making the offering. But yeah, there's an interesting question. And the Torah only seems to focus on one or two priests at a time. Right? It's Moses and Aaron, and then it's really about Aaron's sons, Nadav and Abihu, and then it's really about Eleazar and Itamar, and then it's about Pinchas. They kind of pick one to focus on in each of the different stages of development in the Torah. But we have to then parallel that to what's going on historically.
Can I answer his
Yeah.
question? So in other cultures, the priestly class was the educated class. So for example, in Egypt, they were the ones that measured with a nilometer the height of the river and when the floods would come, and they knew geometry, and so they were the intellectual elite. These were just their official kind of ritual duties, but they had very practical. They were universities, basically. That's my understanding.
Oh, that's good.
Okay, let's look at page 630. Would someone like to read? We're going to read chapter 9, and then we're going to read chapter 10. Go ahead, Jerry.
On the 8th day, Moses called Aaron and his sons and the elders of Israel. He said to Aaron, "Take a calf of the herd for a purification offering and a ram for a burnt offering, without blemish, and bring them before the Lord. And speak to the Israelites, saying, Take a he-goat for purification offering, a calf and a lamb, yearlings without blemish, for a burnt offering, and an ox and a ram for an offering of well-being to sacrifice before the Lord, and a grain offering with oil mixed in, for today the Lord will appear to you." They brought to the front of the tent of the meeting the things that Moses had commanded, and the whole community came forward and stood before the Lord. Moses said, "This is what the Lord has commanded that you do, that the presence of the Lord may appear to you." And Moses said to Aaron, "Come forward to the altar and sacrifice your purification offering and your burnt offering, making expiation for yourself and for the people. And sacrifice the people's offering and make expiation for them, as the Lord has commanded."
Okay, so what's happening in this situation? What's the story?
Ritual killing.
Okay,
What?
for what purpose?
Expiation. This is something valuable given up by the Israelites to show their devotion to God.
Good?
I don't understand, what's the purification versus a burnt offering?
Good question. The purification offering and burnt offering have there's a different reason why you're bringing it. So in the Hebrew, if you're looking in verse 2, you have ben bakar lechatat. Chatat is a sin offering.
Sin.
Okay? Which usually means that you're bringing that offering for the purpose of atonement. As opposed to an olah, which might be for another reason altogether. It's not going to be one that's eaten, but it's a gift that you're offering that's pleasing to God for another reason, but it's not for the sake of trying to atone or expiate for one's sins. Alright, so there's 5 different kinds of offerings. There's an olah, a whole offering. There's a grain offering. There's a shlamim, a zevel shlamim, a well-being offering. That's like a Thanksgiving offering. There's a chatat offering and an asham offering. Right, so the last 2 are 2 different kinds of sin offerings that you would do depending on what the sin was. That's exactly right. So there's unintentional sin offerings and intentional sin offerings. Okay, meaning when you know you did something wrong, or on the off chance that you did something wrong but you didn't know about it. So in this case, why would they be offering an offering of a whole offering and an offering of sin?
I don't know if that's the question I'm answering. But this whole thing is leading to the holiness code where they have to be holy.
Yep.
And they're going to be taking these offerings from the people to
Yep.
make them holy.
Yep.
And therefore, they first have to cleanse themselves, purify themselves before they can do anything for the people.
Correct. That's right. Before they start their job, they need to be pure. But let's look at it even a little bit more clearly. Look at verse 2 for a second and see if you can play on the pun. Vayomer el Aharon, he speaks to Aaron, Kach lecha, take for yourself, Egel ben Bakar. Take for yourself a calf of the herd to offer as a sacrifice. Why do they want Aaron to take a calf for a
golden
sacrifice.
calf.
Got it.
Yeah.
Before he can start his job as a priest, he needs to atone for the sin of the golden calf. Right? It's Aaron who is doing this here. So in some ways, this is like a midah keneged midah moment. This is a measure for measure moment. Aaron, in order for him, remember, Aaron is the first priest. He's the first high priest. He can't do this job until he has atoned, if you will, for what he did wrong. So he has to become an example, if you will, for the people. And he has to take this in a certain way. And not only does he have to do it, but the Israelites have to do it too. Go ahead.
So he's giving a whole offering. So when Aaron is about to give a sacrifice to God, which of the 5 is he giving?
He's giving 2.
He's giving 2. The sin.
Look which one he does first.
Sin.
The first thing he does is he gives a sin offering of an egel, and then he gives an olah. So
That's great.
first he atones, if you will, and then he can offer an olah, a whole burnt offering to God as his first act of leading the people as priest. Okay? This is intentional. It's what the Torah is trying to do, is suggest that there's a reason why Aaron is doing what he's doing. We've just spent all of this time talking about being confused. Jerry brought it up last time. How is it that Aaron gets off the hook? Right? Why doesn't he get killed? Well, he doesn't get off the hook. Not only does he not get off the hook, he has to be, if you will, the first person to offer something. And before he can even do his job, he has to offer a sin offering for his sin with the golden calf.
Whose herd is this?
Who's what?
Whose herd is this?
Presumably it's the people's. I mean, they're all
What
kind of
happens-
together at this point. It's not the Levites because they don't really own property, so it's coming just from the camp at this point.
Were there certain animals he had to use?
Yeah, there's a whole host of animals that they have. I mean, obviously they have to be kosher animals, but yeah, there's specific animals. Yeah. Each sacrifice has its own concoction of which kind of animal, what's permissible. Sometimes you can have multiple kinds of animals, and then there's the poor person's offering, in which case they can give whatever they have.
So the
Turtle doves.
Yeah, turtle doves, a grain, yeah,
Grains.
all kinds of things.
The Ola offering, of course, is burned. It's completely combusted. What happens to the sin offering?
It is also.
It is also burnt, but it's eaten also.
Mm.
Neither the sin nor the Ola. How do you distinguish?
The ones that are eaten are the grain offerings and the well-being offerings.
So they
I thought that they.
It's about intention. Say again?
I thought that they could just take the spine and the guts and the excrement and burn that and then eat what's left over.
For the sin ones, I don't remember if that's what they did for the sin
Yeah,
ones.
I
If you
don't
want, you
either.
have to go back.
I'm not clear on that. So you said there was one for God. There's one for a sin where you knew it. There's one for a sin where you don't know it. What are the other 2? The reason I keep pressing on this is you're making a sacrifice
Here. There were
To
5.
to Elohim, to God, or are you making a sacrifice because you didn't follow the rules?
Okay, so there's the Olah. This is the Holocaust offering. Right? It's completely consumed.
But who is it to? What is the object of the...
God.
Okay. That's
You're asking which
so
God?
that's a traditional pagan offering. The Olah is what the pagan people used to do.
In this case, it's, I mean, if you were to go back to most of the references to God in this are going to be Adonai. Here, if you want, follow along with me for a second. Go to the very beginning of Leviticus. Page 585. "585 says, Vayikra el Moshe, the Lord calls to Moses, Vayedaber Adonai elav, and speaks to him from the Ohel Moed, from the tent of meeting, which we could have a whole conversation about what that is. Daber b'nei Yisrael v'matalehem, speak to the people and say to them, when a person comes close to the Lord, min ha-behema, min ha-bakar, min ha-tzon takriba korbanchem. When you are making an offering, you have to choose something from the herd or from the flock. If he's offering a burnt offering, an olah, it needs to be from the herd. He needs to make his offering a male without blemish. He needs to bring it to the entrance of the tent of meeting, put his hand upon the head of the burnt offering so it's acceptable. The bull shall be slaughtered before the Lord, and Aaron's sons and the priests. They're going to offer the blood, dashing the blood against the sides of the altar. The burnt offering is going to be flayed and cut into sections, put on the altar, and then let's see, with the head and the suet and all of the stuff, and the entrails are going to be washed, and the priest shall turn the whole into smoke on the altar as a burnt offering, a gift of pleasing odor to the Lord. That's an olah. The rest of the there's the first 5 chapters of Leviticus detail each of the 5 offerings. So we have olah, we have the zevach shlamim, which is a gratitude offering, a thanksgiving offering, or well-being. We have the grain offering, which is called the mincha.
So those are like bounty sacrifices.
Yeah, the grain offerings are the same offerings that we would use in the morning for shacharit, for the morning service, and for mincha, the afternoon service. If you had a musaf offering, an additional offering for Shabbat or holiday, it's going to be an animal of sorts. And then there are 2 different kinds of sin offerings. There's the asham and the chatat. They cover basically things that you know about and things that you don't know about. These are the ones that they're going to eat. The rest of them are going to be consumed. This one presumably is to please God, and these are for expiation.
By the way,
Which, by the way, we didn't go to yet, but if you look at chapter 16 of Leviticus, it's the whole Yom Kippur ritual, where you got the 2 goats, one that's going to get sacrificed for a sin, and one will go off into Azazel. Yeah.
In the section you told us to read when they're talking about the olah,
Yeah.
they quote Leviticus 22:8. Better that they bring their offerings to my table than that they bring them before idols.
Yes. We have to get through the bulk of the worship structure before we can say what not to do with them. So the first thing that they're doing is they're going to tell you what they are and how to do it. Then we're going to start the system. That's what we're doing right now in chapter 8. And then we're going to give you the warning of what not to do, which we're going to get to in chapters 9 and 10. Right? Because what you're going to see as soon as we finish reading chapter 9?
Chapter 9.
As soon as we read chapter 9, you're going to realize that the priests screw it up on the first day. That's the story of Nadav and Abihu, which we're going to get to in just a minute. Okay? So they're doing think of it like what's the word? An installation. Okay, this is what you all did for me when I came here. You brought me an olah and a chatat, and you said whatever. Okay, so they're doing an installation, they're doing a dedication, they are formalizing the role of the priest. And who has to go first? Aaron. What kind of thing does he have to start with? Sin offering. What kind? An egel. Okay? Jerry, will you continue? Where were you? Verse 8, I think.
Verse 8.
Yes.
I mean, aren't all animals God's creatures?
Yes.
So why is it that then we treat animals like they are worthless when using them as sacrifices to God? And why? And what benefit are they getting? The animals getting as they're being sacrificed?
I don't think the animals are getting any benefit from it.
Not much.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's supposed to be about raising the idea of food from just something to something holy. And the idea that you weren't really going to eat meat very often, but the meat that you ate, you, by sacrificing part of it and sharing the rest, you elevated that.
But these are animals, and we're killing them.
Okay, but it's not all animals.
Right. Yeah.
So I think that your point is well taken, and we can all sympathize with it. But I think it's important to understand that we're sacrificing animals and not children. And in that sense, it's
An evolution.
it's a step up. Yeah.
And who did the first sacrifice? And when did he do it? It was Noah after the flood.
No, actually, the first sacrifices are done by Cain and Abel.
Oh, I forgot about that.
That's the whole problem, is that Abel brings the choicest of his whatever to sacrifice, and Cain doesn't. God rejects it.
Rejects the meat.
No.
In favor
It's,
of
I don't remember the
Accepts the meat,
specifics of it.
rejects
If you, it's chapter 4, if you want to look back in Genesis
Yeah.
He
quickly.
accepts the meat and rejects the veggies.
Basically, it says, Abel became a keeper of sheep, and Cain became a tiller of the soil. In the course of time, Cain brought an offering to the Lord from the fruit of the soil. And Abel, for his part, brought the choicest of the firstlings of his flock. The Lord paid heed to Abel and his offering, but to Cain and his offering he didn't pay any heed. Cain was much distressed, and his face fell, and the Lord said to him, "Why are you distressed?" Etc. So, presumably, it was because Abel brought the choicest. He brought that which was better. Okay, but you actually have to take your question and shift the worldview for a moment. Where does the idea of sacrificing animals come from? Does it come from God? Would you say El? Could be. Does it come from God, or is it a human desire to please God? Meaning, does God command us to sacrifice, or do we come up with this idea of wanting to sacrifice in order to please God?
Through Moses, God commands it.
Huh?
Through Moses, God commands it. He says,
Here, yes. But where does it come from initially?
But it's not part of the Ten Commandments.
Nope.
well, if you go back to Cain and Abel, it was their idea.
That's right. So in some ways, the reason why people offer things to God was because they wanted to take something of value that they had, which I know it doesn't help benefit the animal, right? But they wanted to take something of value that they had and use it as a way of giving of themselves to God. But remember, it's not only about, in general, they actually prefer that you don't burn the animal, that you will eat the animal. It becomes a source of nourishment and sustenance for the priests. But in this case, the act of doing the sacrifice, if it wasn't for one of the purposes of either a sin offering or an olah offering, was actually to do it for the sake of offering it in the name of God and then being able to eat what you have cooked, so to speak. So they weren't trying to just waste it. It wasn't just a unintentional slaughter. The other ones, though, they wanted to do a ritual act as a way of responding to something that had happened, which was not an uncommon thing in the ancient world. But then PETA came along and got rid of it. But actually, to your point, Jerry, I think that's what the tension is that the prophets start to wrestle with in the First Temple period. Why are we actually doing this? If you think that doing sacrifices is a way of getting out of changing your behavior, you're wrong. And the prophets are the first one to totally challenge that, and that's why after the destruction of the First Temple, there's a dissonance about do we go back to that style of worship or not. And by the Second Temple destruction, we've abandoned it altogether. To put it one step further, the Mishnah records all of the laws of the oral tradition around sacrifices. They didn't even write Gemara on it. Almost all of the tractates that deal with sacrifices, there's no Gemara. So those tractates of Talmud only record what they did, but no future conversations of what it would look like to continue. So I think they recognize exactly what you're raising. Okay, let's try to get through chapter 9, and then, because I want to get to chapter 10, that's where the meat of it is. Oh,
Aaron came forward to the altar and slaughtered his calf of purification offering. Aaron's sons brought the blood to him. He dipped his finger in the blood and put it on the horns of the altar. And he poured out the rest of the blood at the base of the altar. The fat, the kidneys, and the protuberance of the liver, from the purification offering, he turned into smoke on the altar, as the Lord had commanded Moses. And the flesh and the skin were consumed in fire outside the camp. Then he slaughtered the burnt offering. Aaron's sons passed the blood to him, and he dashed it against the sides of the altar. They passed the burnt offering to him in sections, as well as the head, and he turned it into smoke on the altar. He washed the entails and the legs and turned them into smoke on the altar with the burnt offering. Next he brought forward the people's offering. He took the goat for the people's purification offering and slaughtered it, and presented it as a purification offering like the previous one. He brought forward the burnt offering and sacrificed it according to regulation. He then brought forward the grain offering, and taking a handful of it, he turned it into smoke on the altar, in addition to the burnt offering of the morning. He slaughtered the ox and the ram, the people's sacrifice of well-being. Aaron's sons passed the blood to him, which he dashed against every side of the altar, and the fat parts of the ox and the ram, the broad tail, the covering fat, the kidneys, the protuberance and the livers. They laid these fat parts over the breasts, and Aaron turned the fat parts into smoke on the altar, and elevated the breasts and the right thighs as an elevation offering before the Lord, as Moses had commanded. Aaron lifted his hands toward the people and blessed them. He stepped down after offering the purification offering, the burnt offering, and the offering of well-being. Moses and Aaron then went inside the tent of meeting. When they came out, they blessed the people, and the presence of the Lord appeared to all the people. Fire came forth from before the Lord and consumed the burnt offering and the fat parts on the altar. And all the people saw and shouted and fell on their faces.
Okay, so what happens?
Sacrifices were accepted.
Yep. He sacrifices the things that he needs to sacrifice. He does the sacrifices on behalf of the people, and the sacrifices were accepted. The check cleared the bank, and everybody's happy. Okay?
And he followed the
But
procedure
fire
strictly.
came from the Lord.
That's what it says.
Yeah.
So that's like the burning bush all over again?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just...
Kind
Except
of.
they consumed.
So it's not exactly clear what that means. It could mean that God's presence is then felt among them. It could mean that remember, what was the way that the Israelites were guided in the wilderness? There was a pillar of smoke or cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. So it could be that they were experiencing God's presence in the right way, or in the kind of safe and healthy way. But at the very least, what it means is that the sacrifices as offered were accepted.
Because they were offered in the prescribed manner.
That is correct. They were offered in the prescribed manner. Aaron did it correctly. He did it in the right order. The people did it. They did it in the right order. All of the different pieces that go into it were done correctly. Part 1. Now we're on to part 2.
I didn't notice there was foreign fire that killed people before Aaron's children were killed. That's interesting.
Yeah,
I never noticed that before.
All right. Someone want to read chapter 10? Go ahead, Bob.
Now Aaron's sons Nadab and Abihu each took his fire pan, put fire in it, and laid incense on it, and they offered before the Lord alien fire, which he had not enjoined upon them. And fire came forth from the Lord and consumed them. Thus they died at the instance of the Lord. Then Moses said to Aaron, "This is what the Lord meant when he said, 'Through those near to me I show myself holy, and gain glory before all the people.'" And Aaron was silent.
Okay.
What's going on?
Yeah. If you can let me know when you find the answer, let me know. All right. So immediately after Aaron does what he does, and everything is accepted, and everything is great, and etc., Nadab and Abihu, Aaron's oldest sons, come forward, and they take their fire pans, and they put the incense in it, and they offer it to the Lord, and God essentially comes down, kills them in an instant, and consumes them in fire. What's going on here?
They didn't follow the directions.
Okay. What were the directions?
Those were given by Moses to Aaron, and Aaron carried them out to the letter.
Okay.
There's nothing that says they were supposed to do this.
Yep. So that is one possibility. What else?
I think it's also punishment for further punishment.
Okay, that is an argument that has been made by many commentaries, that this was a punishment for Aaron. Pretty harsh punishment.
They went to the Holy of Holies, which only the high priest was allowed to do.
So we don't have a lot of information about what they did or didn't do. What we do know is that they take their materials that they need, they put the incense out there, and it says, "Vayakrivu lifnei Adonai," they bring close to Adonai as an offering, "Eish zara asher lo tziva otam." They bring a strange fire. They translate it as an alien fire, which is also an okay translation. Asher lo tziva otam, that was not commanded to them. So, what made their eish, their fire, zara, alien?
The lack
It
of
wasn't
command.
human.
So it could be that it's the lack of command, meaning if it wasn't prescribed or it wasn't commanded to be done, that in and of itself makes it alien. Jerry?
No, but I mean, it wasn't a living thing. It was incense.
Okay, maybe that was the part of the issue, is that they went with incense. They didn't go with an animal or with grain or one of the other prescribed things. Maybe that's part of it. So they actually got the recipe wrong, if you will.
Aren't there,
They bought the wrong ingredients.
aren't there these offerings also that they're burned frankincense? They often talk about that, right? It's
Yes, but usually the pleasing odor is as a result of the sacrifice. They do burn other incense and hyssop and
Right.
frankincense and those kinds of things, but it's not usually as part of the, it's not actually what's being sacrificed.
Okay.
It's part of the process, yeah?
it almost doesn't matter what they did wrong. The point is, isn't that pretty horrific what happened as a result? And what, to show to the people,
Yep.
you better follow these directions.
Yep.
So it's more, to me, it just comes out as, doesn't much matter what they did wrong, it's just that whatever the rules are, you better follow them.
Yeah.
Well, the explanation I have here is they had two explanations I just read. One was that they weren't supposed to bring fire into the tent because God was going to bring the fire himself, and they showed no faith in God, and so they did it themselves. That was one here.
Mhm.
The other was that they're showing ambition and egotism, that they were trying to advance themselves to become priests along with Aaron before it was their time.
Yep.
And they showed a lack of respect by doing that.
Could very well be.
But they do bring fire into the Holy of Holies, otherwise how else was it
Well, so
The
let's
animal
take a
burned.
look at that for a second.
before the fire, before the God's presence came in?
Where do you see that?
No, in the earlier they burnt it into smoke.
Yes, but what they're burning into smoke is the animal. Is the
Right,
sacrifice.
but
It
they
doesn't
brought-
say.
How did it start?
It just says Vayasimu aleha ketoret. They place on it the incense. It doesn't say what they're placing on it for sacrifice. I want to compare for a moment verse 24 of the previous chapter and verse 2 of chapter 10. So if you can, I want you to put your finger on the Hebrew, Vatetse. They both start the same way. So in verse 24 on page 632, and then verse 2 on page 633. It reads, they both start, Vatetse Eish Milifnei Adonai. Okay, a fire comes out or comes forth from Adonai. And then it says in verse 24, Vatochal al hamizbeach et ha'olah. And it consumes the olah that's on the altar, vet chalavim and the fats, and everyone sees it. But in verse 2 it says, Vatochal otam. God consumes them. It's almost as if, on some level, to Jerry's point, say they're the sacrifices. Now we can ask the question, why? That's a really interesting question. Yes.
I have an epiphany on this one.
Okay.
So, they weren't allowed in. They weren't priests. They were the son of a priest. They were not anointed.
Son of a priest.
Son of a priest.
The joke from last-
So, if you're afraid of...
Wasn't it your joke, though? Why do you want to be a priest?
Oh, be a priest, yeah, because my father's a priest.
So, if you want to secure the priesthood so that there's not a constant coup, you better make it clear to people that God will destroy
So
you.
I'm going to reframe what you just said in a slight way. They are priests. They are also son of priests, but they are not
Designated.
the high priest.
Right.
They're not the Kohen Gadol.
And God is the cherubim that's going to keep the priest safe.
Right. So on one hand,
Right.
Aaron is
Exactly.
protected because it is his responsibility to go in and do it. On Yom Kippur, who goes into the Holy of Holies to offer the sacrifice to God and make expiation on behalf of people? Only the high priest. What do they do as a backup?
They
They tie a string around the high priest, a crimson string, on the off chance that he dies or he faints or something happens to him, and they can yank him out of there and then send in vice high priest. Okay?
Deputy.
They
That's in a lot of horror movies.
They
you
called
know.
it Peep instead of
Is
Veep.
it?
But okay.
Are the,
Yeah.
It's almost like the story of the Sorcerer's Apprentice.
Yeah. Exactly.
are the Cohens now from high priests then?
No. So it's
The ones now, who were...
let me use a different analogy. Think about the King of England. Right? Every son or daughter that's born to the king and the queen, they're all princes and princesses. They all, in theory, have some line, like the child that was just born, I think, is what, fifth in line for the
Yes.
throne?
Yeah.
Okay, which means that hypothetically he could become king. But the likelihood of him becoming king is so small, it's the same thing with the high priest. Right? All of Aaron's sons could become the high priest, but he's got 4. He's got Nadav, Abihu, Itamar, and Abihu. Huh? No. Eleazar and Itamar. Thank you. Okay, so, but the likelihood of them taking over immediately is not very great because we got Aaron. Now, Nadav and Abihu are next in line, and we'll call them pits, priests in training.
I still want to know what is the connection with today's Kohanim
Oh,
They
nothing.
don't.
Nothing. Because at this point, the Kohanim that we have today are only ceremonially Kohanim, meaning they're familially Kohanim, but they have no ceremonial function.
But they still,
They don't-
The descendants
It's
of-
still-
the descendants
in
of
the
Aaron,
Orthodox.
They're all descendants of Aaron,
they
yes.
They still bless the people, you know,
On the high holidays, yes.
They're still descendants of Aaron.
They're still descendants of Aaron, but there's no distinction between a high priest and every other priest.
Uh-huh.
Is that what you're asking?
So
Try
I
again.
just wondered where the connection comes in.
The presumed assumption is that everyone who is a Kohen today
Mhm.
is a direct descendant of Aaron.
Yeah, okay.
So,
But they're not high priests.
They're not high priests.
Right? The only one who there can only be one high priest, if you will, and the only way that we'd even have a high priest is
No,
if there was
I
a
know.
temple.
Yeah.
But yes, they're all descendants, presumably, of Aaron.
Uh-huh. So they have their function in the services.
Yes, their function would be either being called up for the first
time.
aliyah,
Uh-huh.
or doing the Birkat Kohanim, the priestly
Yes.
blessing,
Uh-huh.
depending on where you are, either on the high holidays or the
Yeah.
festival holidays, or in Israel they do it every day.
Yeah,
The video, nothing.
Yeah, the redemption, whatever.
yeah.
The Levites is anyone who is a descendant of all of the other siblings or children of Levi that are not through the Aharonic line. So Moses, Korach, all of the other cousins and things like that that are all descendants of Levi, they're the Levites according to Jewish tradition today. Did you follow me on that one?
But the Levites don't have any function.
The only function that the Levites have today is having the second aliyah, right? Or they're the ones who wash the hands and the feet of the priest before they do the priestly blessing. Which is not a glorious job per se, but but yes, that's their ceremonial function or symbolic function today. Ziva?
I want to bring a teaching from the PJCC earlier class today, where one of the students, Mark, said, right at this time we see we're no longer at the hunter-gatherer stage of civilization. We're at this collective.
Yeah.
We're tied to the land situation. And so this is harnessing religion. We're harnessing God to keep still, to guide. It becomes the rule book for civilization, for civil living. So I love that.
Yeah, it's nice. Yeah, in a way, this is creating a more formalized structure of living and worship than we've had before, right? Which is more organized, presumably, than the nomadic hunter-gatherer wilderness kind of thing that was before.
Why do you think it says Otam rather than specifying?
Nadav and Abihu.
Because I think, it says he killed them, right?
Mhm.
But who are them? I
Um,
mean, are we sure that it's Nadav and Abihu? Is it reflected anyplace else?
the only place that it's reflected, so it's an interesting grammatical question. It says in the beginning of verse 1, Vayichu b'nei Aharon, and the sons of Aaron took, Nadav and Abihu took, Ish machtato, right? They took each one of their fire pans, and then each of the subsequent verbs are in the plural, referring to the them. So vayitnu, vayasimu, vayakribu, otam, and vayamutu. So presumably the only other subject that's in this story besides Nadav and Abihu is God. So from the textual perspective, it would seem to be that it's them. Although you're right, it doesn't mention them again by name, which may be for a different reason.
I don't understand the line after this. When he said, "To those near to me, I show myself holy and gain glory."
Oh, you mean Moses' pastoral, compassionate, understanding statement of having just lost his son? Yeah, that one?
I don't get that.
Yeah, I don't either. So,
No, I think I get it now.
okay.
The deal is God will fry your children if they don't do what I say. And if I'll take the high priest children, who are you?
Yeah.
You better stay clear. You better stay clear of this place, because only the high one is allowed to do this.
Okay. and I'll give it a little bit more texture.
Okay.
Moses says to Aaron, "This is what the Lord meant when he said, 'Through those near to me I show myself holy and gain glory for all of the people.'" Who gave Aaron the instructions initially to make the sacrifice?
I think
The people.
Moses is implied, but it's not clear.
It's Moses vis-a-vis God.
Uh-huh.
Right? Go back to the
Right,
very
right,
beginning
right,
of
right,
this.
Well, God tells Moses to tell Aaron.
I know, but it's not in this chapter. Go back to the beginning of Leviticus. There's a weird formulation at the beginning of Leviticus that is unlike any of the other books of the Torah. If you look at verse 1, page 585, this is to Gary's point, okay? Vayikra el Moshe. And he called to Moses. Who is the he? But there is no subject here to tell us that it's God. And if you look actually in the word Vayikra, look at the last letter.
Cell phones.
It's coming from like here. It's done.
We'll wait until they call back.
It's done.
It's done.
All right? Vayikra, the letter Aleph is actually small. It's a weird formula that some unnamed actor would call to Moses. And then look what the text did. It says, Vayikra el Moshe vayedaber Adonai elav me'ohel moed lemor. And the Lord spoke to him from the Ohel Moed, saying, Daber el bnei Yisrael matalehem. Speak to the Israelite people and say to them. The entire instruction manual of the priests goes from the Lord to Moses and from Moses to Aaron. There's a specific instruction set that has to be followed. Even when Aaron does his things, it is Moses. Look at the beginning of chapter 9. Vayihi bayom hashmini kara Moshe le'Aharon. Moses calls to Aaron and to his sons and to the people, saying, Vayomer el Aharon, speak to Aaron and say, take your whatever. Moses gives the instructions. So what is Moses' weird response here? He's saying, this is what the Lord meant when he said, through those near to me, I'll show myself holy. If I call you and pick you and tell you what to do, then you will be able to act on my behalf or on behalf of the people and do holy things. But if random people, even if they're connected to you, and there's actually a play here on the word bikrovai. Bikrovai from the word karov, right, is also the same root as korban. But bikrovai also has the same understanding as those close to me, meaning my relatives. Don't think that just because your mishpacha does this job means that it's okay. I have to give you very specific instructions about how to allow God's kavod to manifest itself amongst the people.
And there's a second part too, though, is that the reason you do this is to bring glory to God and not bring glory to yourself. So the second phrase, and gain glory before the people, means that two sons went in because not they were serving God, but they were trying to gain some personal glory. And then Moses can't go to Israel because he kind of did the same thing with the staff.
Right. There's a whole interesting pastoral response to this because Aaron's response is silence. And I'm just going to read very quickly verse 4. Moses calls Mishael and Elzaphan, the sons of Uziel, the uncle of Aaron, and said to them, come forward, carry your kinsmen away from the front of the sanctuary to a place outside the camp. They came forward, carried them outside the camp as Moses had ordered. And Moses says to Aaron and to his sons Eleazar and Itamar, do not bury your heads and do not rend your clothes, lest you die and anger strike the whole community. But your kinsmen, all the house of Israel, shall bewail the burning that the Lord was wrought. And do not go outside of the entrance of the tent of meeting, lest you die, for the Lord's anointing oil is upon you. And they did as Moses had bidden. Who gives instructions about how the priests function? Moses. Which is weird, because we think of the priests as separate and apart from Moses.
Yeah, the next paragraph, God's speaking to Aaron.
Yes, and the Lord spoke to Aaron, saying, drink no wine or other intoxicant. It's actually from this text here, 8, 9, and 10, and 11, that people believe that perhaps Nadav and Abihu were drunk.
And going back a little bit more, you will see, the Lord spoke to Moses and asked him to command Aaron and his sons.
Now, what this could be is a polemic between priests. This could be the Mushite priests and the Aharonic priests kind of duking it out with one another,
Right.
which we'll have to look at. Or if it's not, if it's all the Aharonic priests, maybe what it actually is God being very specific about how this happens. In which case, you can't just go in and perform the functions of the priests. You have to be called to do it, you have to be given instructions of how to do it, and you have to do it in a very specific way. And anything that's done other than that won't be tolerated and will be punished by death. Yeah.
And that's setting up all of Leviticus for me.
Yeah.
Because when we get all these laws,
Sure.
you can't interpret those laws. You have to follow the laws. And here's the example of what happens if you don't follow the laws exactly as you've been instructed to do.
You got it.
This is the Hukim part, or is it the Mishpatim part?
Well, in this case,
Which
it's
is
the
which is
Hukim
which?
probably.
Hukim is which?
Hukim are the ones that we don't necessarily
Don't
understand.
necessarily understand.
Mishpatim are the ones that we do.
We
If
can
you take a
rationalize.
revisionist view of this,
Yep.
it may be saying to us, Moses is the one that the people see as having real legitimacy. And the only way that Aaron's can get away with doing what they're doing, taking over, is if Moses told
That's right.
Yeah.
them to
And,
do
and
it.
by the way, if you remember the golden calf incident, Moses is the one who comes down and saves the day. Aaron is spared, but it is then Moses who gives all of the instructions to Aaron about what it is that he's going to do. And so on some level, that's the tension that we have here in our story between priests.
Well, that's the only reason Aaron is even involved. He was only ever to be a mouthpiece because Moses was thick of tongue. He had no other capacity other than that from the beginning.
That's true, but the interesting thing is we always think about the priests in general, in Jewish tradition, and we think about the priests as being descendants of Aaron.
Yeah.
What this may be suggesting is that we may have multiple narratives that are
Right.
all coming to the surface at the same time that are actually duking itself out in, in opposition to one another to be able to claim power. Who is the one that ultimately can speak to and relate to and help understand what God wants of us?
Moses.
That's the question that we're going to try to answer in understanding who authors the priestly
But you have these
tradition.
Aaronite priests that have assumed authority. And people are asking them, hey, how did you get to be in charge?
Yep.
And somebody writes down, well, Moses told us to do this.
Right.
And that's why these
why
were all introduced by Moses giving us the authority.
Yep. And by the way,
But
The Electoral College.
But it's
I don't wanna
the,
go
it's the, it's the Levites who attach themselves to
Moses.
Moses.
Well, because at a different time, the Levites were probably in charge, but there was a coup.
And you can
Now
take
it's
that one step further with the story of Korach. Who is Korach rebelling against?
Moses.
He's presumably rebelling against Moses, in which case he actually doesn't care so much about Aaron and his priestly status. He cares about Moses and his role. Right? So that's part of what we have to unpack here about who is writing and authoring the priests and what's the political tension that is causing the stories to get written the way that they're written. That's what we're going to start working on when we come back. Okay?
Are you going to bring up
Nope.
at any point, not today, but the actual DNA analysis of
Yes.
Kohanim?
I mean, the
Yes.
Cohen-Modal hypothesis?
Yes. Yeah, we'll look at it. I'll bring an article
The
into
Y
to
chromosome
look at it.
marker.
I don't want to steal thunder, but you're going to talk about the last priest in the priestly line and how that happened?
We'll get there eventually.
'Cause